All right. Well, I'm going to kick off in the interest of time. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for Healing the Movement at USCAN. We're happy you can be here today, and we look forward to sharing this conversation with you. Please take a look at the chat because we're going to drop the meeting agreements in there. Feel free to add any additional ideas you may have. But do read through those because we want to make sure that this conversation is comfortable for everyone. To get us started, I'd just like to do a little grounding exercise. First, I definitely would like everyone to recognize the energy they're bringing into this space. If you have any to-do lists or other emotional baggage you're carrying, let it go for the duration of this call. Second, if you could show compassion to other participants in the meeting. We don't know what everyone may be dealing with today, so please allow space. Third, take a deep breath, and as needed, feel free to do an emotional reset by turning off your camera or your microphone. Feel free to walk around. And then last, let's just set a personal intention for this meeting. You can create your own intention, but for instance, my intention will be to cultivate a space for a sense of presence, attentiveness, and compassion during our time together. So I'll give you all just a second to think about your intention. Okay, with that, let's jump into the meat of the meeting. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about how we got here. Over the past few years, USCAN members have been focused on building alignments by working together in action teams towards shared aims, learning with one another, sharing resources, and developing principles and practices of equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion. As part of this work, it became apparent that there was a need for exploring how we communicate internally, whether in facilitated group conversations or one-on-one, while also doing the external facing work on climate. This team that's been working on this has been pretty integral to the ongoing work of building out healing-centered engagement, which is now also an integral part of the new USCAN strategy plan. It began with building out a framework, thinking about things such as developing guiding principles, what a shared language and vision would be for how we support one another, building our trauma awareness and deepening relationships. As the network moves to campaigns, this work is critical to our frontline and movement building strategies. Over the past few months, those of us who have been taking part in this work, we have spent a lot of time reflecting on many themes, such as adopting a community care approach to addressing trauma and healing from it, acknowledging culture and identity in understanding trauma and associated healing, the connection to political work to remove roots of systemic trauma, including the importance of focusing our energy here, and the appreciation for youth and children focused healing-centered approach and how all these themes intersect. We've worked on our skills as facilitators through role-playing by sharing our own experiences with navigating difficult conversations, as facilitators where harm was inflicted, or by telling stories about how we've experienced harm in a group setting. And today, we're happy to share with you the outcomes of this journey. I'll pass it off.
Okay. Come next. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is trauma. I'm Dave Friedman. I'm a member of the committee, him, and I'm in Traverse City, Michigan, if anybody cares. And it's not cold here right now, which is a joke amongst the members of the committee. Anyway, so what is trauma? Research increasingly shows that victims of climate change disasters are left with deep psychological wounds, from anxiety after hurricanes to surges in suicide during heat waves, and that the nation's disaster response agencies are not prepared to treat these issues. Issues such as climate anxiety, climate stress, are now used to address some newly identified psychological issues related to climate. Extreme heat also affects behavior, and as extreme weather events occur more frequently, so too will violence toward women and people of gender minorities. Climate change also displaces individuals and creates climate migration, which also affects individual and group stressors. There are 3 E's for trauma. First one is events. As seen in the photo, fire is an event that could, not will, create trauma in an individual or group that has shared an event such as the major fire depicted. E for experience, circumstances, and dosage. Experience is your personal response to whatever the event was. So it is the circumstances of what happened and how it was felt or perceived. So in the picture shown, there was a significant flood, and it appears that that whole areas were affected. So the dosage is what was your loss and what was the community's loss. How long did the event last? How did the community respond? Did someone or a group ride in on a white horse to help? For me, an example experience was Hurricane Andrew in 1992. That's when I was living in Florida. Andrew devastated large swaths of an area in South Miami-Dade County. The circumstances are such that the dosage was far more significant for those in Homestead, which is South Miami-Dade County, and that was the area's worst hit. Total buildings were literally blown away or washed away during the storm. I experienced this storm differently, and although directly impacted as an emergency manager in addiction treatment program at the time, the storm did not have the same impact on me as, say, one of the board members of my agency that was significantly impacted and lived in the area of impact, as were many others. E is effects: adverse, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual consequences. I chose the picture below with a gun tied in a knot to depict violence or ending violence, but there are all kinds of examples I could have used to depict the effect of trauma. In the story I just shared, the person who lost his home in Andrew, the resultant consequence was possibly affected by E, the event, Andrew, the experience of losing your family home, and then the trauma which followed ended in the effect of filing divorce for that individual. Not maybe totally caused by, but assumably influenced by. The knotted gun was used because we normally relate trauma to physical violence. However, trauma related to climate is just as real as gun violence for those who experience it. After Andrew, many that lost the most migrated north to Broward County, which is close by. It's not very far. If you look at a map, it's right adjacent. However, the makeup of both Miami-Dade County and Broward counties changed significantly after the storm because of the migration of individuals moving north. Children were also adversely affected by this event, and to mitigate nightmares and other challenges faced by these children, the behavioral health community developed comic books and other aids to help the kids get over the trauma of this single event. Those comic books are still used today for trauma for kids. Next slide, please. Oh, good. Okay. Okay, so you assume that there's trauma present in the space. Okay, we're in the environmental arena, and many of us have experienced the trauma. So number one, you provide a content warning if the subject matter of the meeting presentation is related to any kind of violence or trauma, just to let people be prepared and choose to leave if they choose. We need to be fair and help. We need to promote a sense of safety by starting the meeting with a check-in question so folks can share their name and pronouns. Okay, let me go through the pictures. I know I'm supposed to do that. So the pictures below depict possible individuals that are experiencing trauma. It doesn't necessarily mean they are, but they might be experiencing trauma. The one on the far left is a woman that might be in a webinar or a meeting and feeling uncomfortable. Again, we're looking at their body language. Her body language is definitely saying either I'm tired, I didn't sleep, or I'm having a problem. But we need to be sensitive to that. The middle one shows, a cartoonish kind of picture of somebody that actually, how they feel during trauma. They're closing up and hiding away. The third picture, which I can't see right now, I believe is two people. Let me get rid of this. Maybe I can move this. I can't. Is some people talking in an in-person meeting. And possibly if you look at their body language, one person may be a little uncomfortable. Let's go on to slide 3. Okay, these are the possible responses to trauma. Okay, you could fight, you could flight, which means leave. Fawn, which means you're, actually kind of kissing butt, I think is another way of saying fawning, or freeze. An example of flight, I'm going to use myself as a personal example of flight, just because it happened to me. Way back in the 70s, I was involved in a riot. And during that riot, I was down there thinking that I was being a helper because I was wearing an armband and trying to make sure that there wasn't any problems on the street and whatever. We used to wear armbands back then as marshals. Anyway, that was the night that the police showed up with their billy clubs and beat everybody that didn't run away. And of course, I didn't run away because I thought they were going to recognize the fact that I was there as a helper. They didn't. Spent the night in the infirmary, several stitches. The trauma involved with that, however, arose about a year later, months later anyway. I was at another non-event, sitting on the beach with a bunch of friends, just hanging out. Having a good time, probably had a couple drinks, I don't know. But anyway, just hanging out. And several police officers approached us. I was running down the block before I realized what I was doing. So we know what flight is, but we don't always know that we've had a traumatic experience. So we really need to identify it for ourselves and know what how we respond to it and be ready to ask for help if necessary. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the 6 principles that guide us in our healing-centered approaches. Okay, I'm going to go through these by the pictures as well. Okay, so the picture on the top left is to promote safety. Promoting safety means, to me, making sure that people are acknowledged. We kind of, as a presenter, I watch after my folks when they're in a meeting with me and offer them the opportunity to beg out or to, turn off their camera or whatever, or to speak their mind if necessary. Okay. Picture 3, 1, 2, 3, transparency and trustworthiness. Again, I'm a pretty transparent person. I'm willing to share, as you just kind of heard me. And we need to kind of show that as leaders and as moderators in meetings. Picture 5, down the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is peer support. Peer support is all of us working together and supporting each other. And I think we do a lot of that. I have 2 meetings a month, actually, where I just, directly provide peer support to people in the field, because we don't want burnout, because we don't want people dropping out of the field. And I meet with those people regularly. I'm there whether or not they show, and it's a moving group, but that's peer support. Collaboration, which is in picture 4. Skills, experience, knowledge, growth. We share what we have. I mean, my What I share is my background in mental health and substance use and my understanding and ability to share information either online or, telling people where to get it in regard to environment. I do both. Empowerment. Picture number 2. This guy is kind of showing how to empower this kid. He's really listening. I kind of like this because he's showing caring. He's showing transparency, and he's really, he's really listening. So he's empowering that child, which is great. And then picture 6, we need to be cognizant of, that's the one with the drawings, of historical, culture, and gender issues. Really, really important. We need to know where people are, we don't need to know intimately their background, but it helps to pay attention to who they are, where they're coming from. Anyway, I'm going to pass the baton. I believe. Next slide, next presenter, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Bigelow with Creation Justice Ministries, and I am going to talk about why cultural understanding is important as a trauma approach. And so many will understand that when it comes to us coming to this work and we come together as USCAN members or even in other spaces, we have to be conscious about how we show up in these spaces, and not only how do we show up in these spaces, but also how do others show up in these spaces as well. And so when we are together, not only do we bring work with us, we bring our lived experiences into the room. And just to give a quote right now, trauma-informed care encourages support and treatment to the whole person rather than focusing on treating individual symptoms or specific behaviors. And so when we do this work and we try to approach from a healing sense and to address trauma, we have to do it knowing that we're bringing our full selves to the table, and we're bringing and everyone else is also bringing our full selves, and that includes our lived experiences. And so when we come to these spaces without cultural understanding, we then are susceptible to further traumatizing people in our conversations that we have or actions that we have. This is especially true for people who come from communities that are historically and currently facing discrimination. So as a warning, I'm going to bring up some racial conversations that have happened in real life experiences for some people. I tried to use milder examples, but an example of this would be how a friend who gave me permission to share this example is a Black woman, and she was in a room or in a presentation with a white woman who was speaking about capitalism. And the group was a mixed race group, but it was predominantly Black people in the room. And when talking about capitalism, she transitioned and by saying, "Do you like slavery?" And that was her way of pretty much trying to compare the experience that workers at Amazon were experiencing. And so I say that to say is that it felt like it was very tone deaf for many of the people in the room. And just using that as an example, although the woman may have meant well, her experience was very traumatizing, and it felt a bit dehumanizing to the people who have, their ancestors experienced slavery. And so because of that, we need to make sure that we're being careful with our words. And again, making sure that we're understanding who is in the room and the lived experiences or even historical experiences that many have faced. And so we also want to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of reducing people and cultures simply to trauma that's been experienced. And so people can experience trauma at an individual level, but also cultures can experience trauma collectively. And so we want to make sure that we are not only looking at a trauma-informed approach as we come to this work, but also a healing-centered approach. And a healing-centered approach is holistic, involving culture, spirituality, civic action, and collective healing. A healing-centered approach views trauma not simply as an individual isolated experience, but rather highlights the ways in which trauma and healing are experienced collectively. And the term healing centered engagement expands how we think about responses to trauma and offers more holistic approach to fostering well-being. And so as we do this work, we need to make sure that we are not reducing any individual or a group of people or identity to the trauma that they experience, but instead know that on one side of trauma, there's also beauty that comes out of cultures and communities. And so making sure that we are seeing people and cultures in the full space that as they bring into our USCAN community and beyond our USCAN community. But that's part of the importance of cultural understanding, is making sure that we are bringing our full selves to the table and people are comfortable to do so. I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you. My name is Tammy Murphy. I'm with Physicians for Social Responsibility, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the experiences I have had practicing with either trauma-informed approach or heart-centered approach to facilitation. I was fortunate enough about a year ago to a little more than a year ago, planning for some toxic tours that we were going to give in southwestern Pennsylvania. Rosita put me in touch with Archbishop Marcia Dinkins, and we got along just great. She was wonderful to work with, and she came up with some really great guidelines for everybody on these tours. So the idea was we were showing the areas where people have been impacted by the fossil fuel industry, because there were diplomats from various countries visiting, and they were coming up with what we consider to be false solutions, like blue hydrogen and carbon capture. And the idea there for them is to like basically keep the industry going and put lipstick on the pig and pretend that it's all fine and healthy. And obviously we know that that's not. And what we wanted to show them was how harmful the facilities are in real life for real people on the ground. So if they had the audacity to come out to Pennsylvania and promote these ideas, we wanted to be sure that they had the opportunity to see who this was impacting. And we were pretty successful in getting some of the attendance from the event, from this event in to some of our tours. Some of the Department of Energy folks came there, and there was a whole mix, because there were also people from other parts of the country who also deal with oil and gas industry in their own communities, and they were coming to see what's been happening in Pennsylvania. So there are people on the tours that are completely removed from it, some who are actually pushing for things that will cause more harm, and then there are people who are also harmed by the same industry. And then we're going to communities where the residents there have been deeply impacted. So there's trauma in a lot of different directions. Even sitting on the bus with somebody who wants to promote these things in your community, knowing that you've been dealing with can be traumatic. So there was a lot of trauma in a lot of different directions. And Archbishop was wonderful in giving us a guideline that we were able to give everybody who participated in the tour. Anyone who even registered for the tour got a copy of these guidelines to prepare for the kinds of trauma and the kinds of emotional experiences that people are going to have that'll show up. We even gave it to the bus drivers, the residents, the guides. Everybody had a copy of it, so that everybody, or we can't promise everyone's going to do their homework, but at least enough people who are participating would be aware of these trauma-informed approaches and be able to step in if there was harm. So just to go through them quickly, it says establish and provide safety, like making a safe space, inviting people to breathe and help them regulate. I guess Tinye modeled in the beginning of this session. It's about regulating their nervous system, keeping things calm, making sure that people don't feel rushed. And we have to make sure that there's like discouraging somebody from kind of making a competition about whose trauma is worse. And making sure that people understand that all things, in a sense, there are some things that are more tragic than other on a scale of things, but there's also like the idea that trauma is also relative. The way it impacts a person is relative to their experience. So it's really not about a competition. Safe things like making sure that people are asking permission about a touch or a hug rather than just leaning in because it might be considered quite offensive. And we have to make sure that we don't gloss over people and actually allow people to sit with their discomfort, with the discomfort of what they're saying, with the discomfort of what they're hearing, without letting it become an awkward space, but with also moving too quickly past some of the hurtful things that people are experiencing. Asking questions to invite concern, rather than saying like, I agree, I went through this too. It's better to ask questions, instead of putting them on the spot to say what's wrong. You can ask them what they need, a whole variety of ways to do that. Again, the idea of making people safe is not something that you do just in the beginning. It's iterative. You have to come back, make sure people are centered. If there is a conflict, there's a point of where you have to kind of feel it out, where it's letting people sit with their discomfort, and then also figuring out ways where maybe we can stand up, stretch, take a pause, maybe take a walk, particularly with somebody who needs it at the time. So the idea of making people safe is iterative and it has to be repeated throughout. And this next point, the final one, is a good transition to my next slide, remembering that healing happens in relationship. It's really important to happen to it. You know, that's why we did it in advance. We gave the guidelines, we practiced them during the toxic tours, and then transitioned afterwards to have a debrief. So that would be my next slide. Thank you. Okay, and then the debriefing after the toxic tours, specifically what we did last September when we gave the toxic tours. There were multiple different tours, and there was a lot going on beyond the tours that was happening that week. So we kind of had to come back as a group and pull ourselves back together and get organized and, you know, reunited with our families that we had been traveling away from, and gave ourselves some time. So we actually gave it a couple of weeks. We let people know that we were following up with a debrief, let them know that it would be a week or two before they got their invitation, and then they'd have another week or so knowing the date of when it would be. So we gave people time and transparency about when it was going to happen, which I think was important. But in that scenario, we felt like time was appropriate. There might be other times when a debrief needs to happen immediately afterwards, or very soon afterwards, because a lot of people were traveling. In part, that was one of the reasons that we gave it some time for people to kind of just come back home and think about it. So we did this together. Archbishop Dinkins and I did this debrief together. It really worked well to have two facilitators to co-facilitate that. Again, very similar about centering the space, making sure it's safe, establishing the norms, and talking about the relevancy of the heart-centered approach, that helps people understand how and why you're doing what you're doing. It might not look the same as other facilitated experiences they've had, so it's healthy to let them know not only that they're safe, but that this is actually a practice that you're intentionally doing. It helped us in this situation, as I think it could in others, but I guess it's also something you have to feel out. But the idea about separating people into different groups, we had the residents who were part of the toxic tour speak first about their experience. Then we had some time for reflection, pausing, recentering. Then we allowed people who were on the tour, who had also come from impacted communities from the oil and gas industry. We allowed them to speak second, as visitors, but also some, experience of their own in their own homes. And then again, pause, reflection, some movement, stuff like that. And then we allowed whoever else was involved in the tours to take part, but we sort of categorized it in that way. And I think that it helped to separate the groups and kind of give priority to the people who repeatedly have to tell their stories on these tours, and then others who kind of mirror that and have their own understanding of it. That was super helpful for us to separate the reflections. Again, always recentering back as needed, because it's something that I feel like with the heart-centered approach, you have to allow for people to digest their feelings. And if you're expecting them to share them, they have to be able to like be comfortable with it. So it's super important. And then the final step for a debrief, which was really important for us and is going forward still, figuring out the next steps and making sure that the impacted community members and the people who are closest to that trauma really have some autonomy about the next steps. And that can come by facilitated structure of how those decisions are made. But I think that that's a really careful step that we need to take. If we can move to the next slide. This was a pretty different experience, but I was really excited to have the guidelines available and have some practice with them. We have had an ongoing relationship, a pretty close ongoing relationship with the Department of Health for the last 4 years. 4 years ago, we were with some of the families from Southwestern Pennsylvania. They were experiencing a really high rate of very rare cancers. This was the first area in Pennsylvania where the fracking started. And, 10 plus years into it, the cancer had metastasized, and lo and behold, lots of children were getting sick and some children were dying of things like Ewing sarcoma. Really tragic situation. The parents that you see in the picture at the forefront here lost their teenage son to Ewing sarcoma. He was a pitcher. He and the catcher both had Ewing sarcoma, and a county or so over, another pitcher and another catcher in a baseball field also had Ewing sarcoma. This is an incredibly rare bone disease. Or cancer that attacks the bones, I should say. But so these really rare cancers have been coming up. They're growing, kind of incredibly in number. The families were super concerned about it 4 years ago. There was like a bombshell report in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette called The Human Toll. And it set off a whole series of events where we eventually, after being really disappointed with the Department of Health and how horribly they facilitated a meeting in the community, we brought them to Harrisburg. They demanded the studies. Eventually they got them. And 4 years later, we were waiting for the results just recently. And they were supposed to be transparent. It was part of the contract between the researchers at University of Pittsburgh and Department of Health. And they canceled on those public meetings repeatedly. So these families were waiting and waiting and waiting to hear the news about the studies, and they were just getting denied. Given the runaround, we know that there were some politicians behind shutting that down. Anyway, it was an incredibly frustrating experience, a whole history of really horrible experiences with the Department of Health. Although we've maintained a relationship with them, I was weary of them finally presenting. So I was super grateful to have Archbishop Dinkins' guidelines that she handed me before. I revised them slightly and gave them to the Department of Health and asked them to review it. To also work with the researchers from Pitt when they were going to present this information to the community and not cause the kind of harm that they have in the past when they first came to the community, and for the 4 years since, like refusing transparency, like to really kind of, I was able to present it briefly, but I really kind of dug more into the fact that this is a really hurt community where children have died. There are some children still suffering from this. There's lots of other cancers going on. So sometimes you have children and parents all dealing with multiple cancers in families at multiple stages of life. It's a really fragile, strong community, but very fragile in the sense of like their feelings being hurt by the Department of Health. They appreciated it and admitted that as bureaucrats, they don't do the people thing well, which I thought was kind of a funny way to phrase things. But they did appreciate it a lot. They declined an opportunity. I said that I would be willing to like coach them through it in preparation for it. I think they didn't want to be held accountable that way. They thanked me for the guidelines then, and then when tension got really high towards the end of the meeting, they did acknowledge that we had shared this kind of help with them and that they appreciated it, and they appreciated the community allowing them back in. They gave an open apology for the harm that they caused. I mean, it was a really different experience 4 years later. And I have to say that I think that the guidelines and the healing centered approach and kind of recognizing that they're humans, they're just not really good at dealing with the public this way. And it's not natural for them to think of people's feelings. They're more into kind of data and things like that, and that's kind of the way they see things, numbers, paperwork, and not actual people. But kind of bringing them home and making them realize that it really did make the final presentation of the research much, much better, I think. And I really appreciated having it and having the training in it. So I hope it's helpful for others too. And I hope that we can find lots of creative spaces to use it in. And that's the end of my slides.
Hi, everybody. This is Chris Hall, and I'm located here in Aiken, South Carolina. So how does this work show up in workplace, and what does this look like versus the movement space? So I think one of the things that's really important to know and understand about workplace and how issues of trauma and just those employee relationships show up is it all starts off with the structure. You know, corporate structures are always top down. There's a lot of policy and politics involved, and from that perspective, that changes everything that flows down below that, and this shows up in a lot of different ways in terms of opportunities for advancement, training, and performance appraisals, interview selection. And although a lot of the organizations, we all acknowledge and understand the importance of diversity and the impact that can have on a workplace. At times when you look at organizations, looking at the board, looking at senior executive level leadership, senior level leadership, what does the diversity mix look like? Diversity in terms of race, diversity in terms of age, diversity in terms of everything. And so I think these are important things to understand when it comes to talking about trauma-informed leadership, and the possibility of healing-centered approaches. And seems there is a deficit focus on employee performance. That often shows up in terms of any kind of written documentation, performance corrections, annual reviews, and everything fits nice and neatly into their system of appraising employees, and it's literally looked at strictly from a numbers perspective and what is felt to be proper performance, or performance that's obviously shows somebody who is excelling in a particular field or not. So the individual is the focus, and not the individual as part of a whole department. And the interesting part about that is when a department runs, I work in IT in a financial institution, how that department runs, how it sets objectives to meet various demands. When that individual is graded through that deficit focused approach, it does not take into consideration that this person's working as part of a team versus is working at individually and not as part of a team. And so there's no real opportunities to look at the bigger picture approach of how their performance is impacted by shifts in staffing, shift in objectives, crisis management, or firefighting. And so there can be no healing centered or trauma related solutions in that kind of top-down approach that focuses on deficits and the individual performance in terms of the goals for the organization versus how this person is just part of the whole picture. Next slide. And how does this relate into the movement space? I'm going to touch on this on these few points here, then going to sum up everything. I've been involved in this movement space through Sierra Club first for 10 plus years, and what I've seen during this time is, particularly as we've taken in more information, a lot of the information that we've covered as part of this committee, talking about trauma and trauma approaches and being informed of trauma and just the whole concept of looking at the individual as a whole. One of the readings that we talked about, one of the individuals in that particular reading talked about being more than just his trauma. I think that one of the things that allows this kind of work to happen is that we are a bottom-up focused organization. There is grassroots, and grassroots have voices. These voices hold people accountable in organizations and should be in the political space as well. But over time, this bottom-up focus is what's allowed organizations like Sierra Club, for example, to try to completely turn the organization towards a different focus, one that's focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and of course, justice. And focusing on the individual, we come back to the individual strengths. Some of the movements and some of the organizations I've been involved with, we often look at different individuals at what are their strengths, where do you want to fit into this place? What can you bring? What drives you? Are you creative? Do you like to crunch numbers? Focusing on the strengths allows us to be able to, do what I had said back in the days in my restaurant business, focusing on putting the aces in their places. When people are focused on strengths and what they do well at, it just creates a much more dynamic environment. And the last piece is part of the whole versus individual. When it comes down to it, when we take on different issues in our communities, whether it's locally, whether it's regionally, each individual that leans into some of the work that's being done in that area, when we all win, when we stub our toes, then we all can sit back and collectively look at things and how all of us together can jump over that hurdle. I think it's important to say that in the corporate world, from 30, 40 years of working in a variety of different industries and different organizations, is I come back to some of the things I've learned through the movement space that talks about colonialism and decolonializing the environment. When you're dealing with some of the trauma that comes in place when you're in the corporate world, there are different tools that they use to engage with employees in order to support them, to help them work through issues. But what you don't see is conversations like the ones that I've seen in the movement space, where people are looking at behavioral issues as other things that are underneath that are driving that. So while they might have EAP, employee assistance programs, they might have a variety of other resources in the corporate space, access to trainings, things like that. But a lot of it comes down to individual leaders and just the whole focus on in the corporate world of profit versus people. A lot of these things are, in my experience, are kind of window dressings. Systems are rigid, and there's always the focus on quantity over quality. And when there are issues in dealing with challenges within the department or in organizations at large, employees might have a space to be able to air grievances, but oftentimes these issues aren't necessarily resolved. I think that's really all I've got for now. Thanks for the opportunity to be part of this.
Thank you, Chris and others. And before Pete takes us into the Q&A, I wanted to give an opportunity to Ren to also share their wisdom and learnings in this space.
Yes, thank you so much. Do you mind if I screen share just real quick? Let's see. I think that does it. Can everybody see this slide?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I just wanted to talk about storytelling and the power that that has within this healing movement space. And we've already kind of talked about it. We've shared stories within this very conversation today. And I truly believe that sharing stories can be an act of good. It can talk about the bad things and the experiences that we've had, while also, having this powerful effect of healing and growing and understanding as we listen to one another. And so just really quickly, I wanted to go over some of the, benefits of what storytelling has for us. It's a way for us to process and heal from traumatic, intense experiences. It's a way for us to seek advice from others if we so choose, and a method to learn as a speaker and a listener what makes for a safe and a healthy environment as we are talking with one another, as we are doing the work that we are doing. And so lastly, just providing a small model of what it means to do this storytelling work, which is, first you have to have a safe space for you to actually feel safe enough to share this story with one another. You need a strong foundation of trust among the people that you're with. So that's the work that happens beforehand in this movement space that we're in. And then during it, you're telling your story and the people around you are all listening so that we can, hopefully get to that third part, which is once it has been said, people, if the speaker is willing, can share what has resonated with them from that story. They can, speak out and say, like, I may have had that, experience, and this is what, I have done in that space. So, if you need any next steps, and asking permission, right, for like giving out advice or giving your own feedback, asking permission of that person who told the story. Is it all right if I, give you my experience, or if I give you my advice for story, for what to do moving forward for this? Having that third part be, optional in how we're giving feedback, but always making sure to recognize what somebody has gone through, and just giving them the knowledge that others have been with them in this space and are here to help when necessary and can help empower that person so that we continue to speak out and to heal together through what has happened to us already. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Rosita.
Thank you so much. And Pete, I hand it over to you to facilitate this final session of Q&A.
Thank you, Rosita, and thank you, Rosita. Thank you, everyone. I'm Pete Kolbenschlag. I'm with the Colorado Farm and Food Alliance, and I want to thank USCAN and Rosita for inviting me into this space. I do think that this approach is a great way for us to think about transforming the spaces that we're in to kind of really help speed up the change that we're trying to create. So the slide said questions, but I would really like to invite questions and discussions and comments from everybody if you have them, and if you want to just raise your hands or otherwise let me know. I'll try to call on people if anyone has questions, or if there's only one person willing to get started, why don't we get going? Anybody? Any questions to our presenters, or just thoughts about that presentation?
I have a question. Should we just share in the
Yeah.
chat?
Okay. You can ask live or share in the chat, either way.
Okay. I'll ask live. Hi, I'm Rabbi Laura Bellins. I hold spiritual adaptation work at Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action. And we are doing a lot of thinking right now about how we support communities, like what kind of spiritual healing care communities need in the wake of climate disasters. And I've been thinking, I guess I'm curious about how these different methods that you all have talked about, healing-centered approaches, storytelling, like how you think that applies or could apply differently when a situation is acute versus more of a, I don't know, sustaining people for the long haul, what it looks like to kind of, I don't know, spiritually resource us for the long haul versus like respond in acute moments.
Yeah, that's a good question. Is there anybody who feels they want to jump up and answer that?
I'll take a shot. I think I didn't quite understand whether you wanted to answer both sides of that or just one, but I think that they both need to be addressed from a perspective of somebody who's worked in the field for a long time on the behavioral health side. Working in addictions in particular, you need your immediate responses. Say what happened after Katrina. I know the feds actually sent quite a few, because I had friends down there that were social workers, to actually deal with immediate needs and help people through the immediate needs. But on the trauma side, you're looking for a lot more long-term response and support. And through any kind of religious institution, you could be providing group sharing, mutual support, those other kinds of not really counseling, but supports that people really need in the long term, because these are hard things to get through. When you look at any community that's had the kind of disasters we've seen, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a flood, whether it's a fire, what brings the community back together is mutual support, in my opinion. And I think stepping in there is really, really important. And that is the role that the religious community could easily play, in my opinion.
And Ren, I think you said you had a comment on that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure also that the way that I understood it is one way that it could be interpreted, like your question could be interpreted, which is that, will the response differ depending on how great the harms are? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I think it's actually the element also has to do with like individual versus like when a whole community has experienced harm, like what was being described, when the entire water system is affected or entire community is dealing with cancer. Anyway, so how do we care for actually in particular like whole communities in those moments? And what might be some of the distinctions?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I really love it. I think, you know, it is important that we think about the differences between individual harms and then the harms that we have within our communities. I think I want to, for a second at least, bring it back to USCAN and talk about, you know, where we are as a network, right? I think that USCAN, we have a support system in place with JEDI, with this newfound healing centers facilitation. And so there are resources out there for us to be using. There is also, I just want to, you know, put in here, there's like a hotline and like a form that you can go to if there has been harms that you've faced. And so I encourage people to use that as they may need it. And then I just want to respond in a broader sense, which is we have to have a support network as people, as community, and we can't be in this alone. And so that's why I really love this network, because you know, we can connect with one another. And not only should we just you know, have our own personal relationships, but we also need to go a step further and acknowledge that when we have greater community harms, that these problems need to be addressed on a systematic level too. And so really looking towards our community leaders to, you know, be the people that are facilitating with those in power to try and come together for a solution that works for everyone is really important. And that's where organizing comes in. So that's what we're all here for. And I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Can I just, I'm sorry for the background noise if you all hear it. We're having some work done on the floor, on our floors. And if it's kind of difficult, I can go back on mute. Laura, first of all, thank you for I echo what Ren said when they expressed, you know, the gratitude for the question. And I just want to add another layer to it because of the fact when you're thinking about the faith community, there seems to be a different role, and the faith community really has to know its role with being like not only trauma informed, but there's a level of being trauma sensitive and trauma responsive. And so to hold that space, I think there's also this work that we have to remember that there's this thing of our faith that we already have a healing narrative too, but then there's the thing in community and how do we connect the faith and the community together at the time of tragedy. And so in doing that, I think it goes back to number one, having, how do I want to put this? Having trauma-informed healers in our congregations for our communities, which also means that there's a level of training that even our clergy need, you know, with regards to being able to respond to community harm, because the local community church or the larger churches play a very big role. And so you know, and for the most part, you know, there's this thing of the individual or the collective trauma. You know, the faith community or the faith leaders, we're confronted with both. And if one is harmed in the community, a lot of times it's just going to be a harm period because of the spiraling down impacts. And so I would admonish or just encourage, Laura, number one is, you know, thinking together more broadly, what does healing mean for the church community? And then how does the church community in turn respond to the issues? Number two, the level of sensitivity and, you know, the awareness. And so that's going to take maybe just folks coming together and thinking that through. and having a plan in place, the way that I see it is having a plan in place when these things come together. So it's a grand opportunity for you to kind of wrestle and grapple with that with other faith leaders or clergy, because we aren't, for the most part, and I say this as a clergy person, most are not trauma informed, trauma sensitive, or trauma responsive because they don't know how to be, and it's not anything that we put there. So I would say part of it is having people get skilled up and scaled up, even if it's just looking at where it's centered at in your faith. And then how do you create a level of listening and hearing so that you can be trauma responsive? Because unfortunately, there is no, and I'll finish here, there is no one size fit all approach to trauma responsiveness. And different iterations happen at different times to meet people right where they are, be it the community or be it the individual. And so to try and one size fit it all would be unfair to you. I would just say that the church has to listen. And then the church has, from listening, they have to then be guided. And I think Dave may have put something in the chat about like the guiding principles that maybe you all can use to start conversation around that, and to really think about, in the time of crisis and tragedy, what is our role in it, and how do we respond to it, and how do we become more trauma informed, sensitive, and responsive in the times of tragedy and crisis for the individual and or the community. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Bishop Marcia. Anyone else have a comment on that discussion or a question for the panels, or just in general? Do people have any experiences they would like to share in this work? Thanks, Chris. Any of our panelists have any comments they'd like to make on that last discussion or anything else?
Yeah, I would just welcome anybody, if you have any sort of feedback whatsoever of what has happened here today. If you have any emotions inside you, whether they're good or negative, like we just want to hear from you all as members, what you think of this. And so yeah, any feedback is welcome.
And you're also welcome to put it in the chat. I think,
I don't know if I want to say this. I'm not sure if I was ever supposed to say anything, but I want to say to Pete, Ren, Dave, I know Chris had to get off, and Tammy and Karen, Alicia, for all of the hard work that you all put into the trauma-informed space, for being courageous enough to stand in the place where most people feel challenged in because of what stirs up when you hear the word trauma, for answering the clarion call, especially in the times that we're living in, and we're living in crisis and critical moments. And so it takes, a courageous stance to be able to sit through, because, for you all who don't know, reenacting and role playing and really taking and feeling other people's harms and their hurts on diverse platforms, and, with a lot of complexities and nuances. So I want to thank each and every one of them for being able, to stay, and it has some staying power and some standing power. I want to give a big heart hug to Rosita, because Rosita has really been one to advocate and promote this. And so when it was brought to USCAN through a conversation that I had with one of our former colleagues that we hold dear to our heart, JC and Marie. I can never say it, Rizavolto, even though she's not joining us, not able to join us today. Just the fact of being able to push and recognize the need for what the movement needed, for what we need, for us to be able to move through the pain as we try to build power, to seek more healing than harm. And I want to give, just a big delicious hug to all the USCAN folks who have, sat through the TIA, pre-entries and the introductions and really, stand in the space and grappling with themselves, as well, to say, am I ready for this? Is this something I need and want right now? And really just going at the pace of their own nervous system and the pace of their capacity, but still being spacious enough to be able to allow this space to be held. I also want to give, kudos to our Jedi team who have also worked, zealous, I cannot say it, relentlessly, and, to bring forth, this work as a joint effort, and so I just wanted in this moment, something that we don't do very often is I want to celebrate. I want to celebrate and I want to thank everyone. I don't want to cry, but if I do, I'm not going to even say forgive me, just send me a virtual tissue. I really want to thank everyone. I miss Astrid, I'm sorry, and Astrid, for this opportunity to even trust me enough, Rosita and Dave and everybody to work with me, and even Stephanie, who created the space for it to be in the orientation. This is something that we need. And I'm celebrating the fact that we are encouraging, we are empowering, we are releasing, we are building, we are breaking, we are cracking. We're still wounded. We're still grappling. We're still uncertain, but we're still hopeful. And that makes for a beautiful pot of stew. You can have it with the meat or without the meat, but it makes for a beautiful pot of stew. And I just want to say to each and everyone that's here, you are that catalyst for your community. You are that one who can take back what you heard today, what you learned today, and you can be that torch bearer and that torch carrier. I said today to women this morning, and I close with this. There's a passage in the Bible, and I'm not superimposing my beliefs on anybody. So that's my disclosure and disclaimer. But there's a passage in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 9, verses 17 through 20, that talks about the skilled mourners and the wailing women. And I learned in my deepest, in really sitting with that, is those were women in community, in local community, who made a space for people to grieve, who made a space for people to be held when they were grieving, who knew how to articulate what people didn't know how to articulate. They were ones who helped the community to acknowledge the hurt, the harm, and the tragedy so that they can move forth in and through their trauma. They were the ones who were called upon, who were skilled, who were also trained, and they were called to scale up and skill up others so that we can have more mourners and more wailers. So in other words, more watchmen, more healers, more people who are willing to take this stand and say, we're experiencing collective pain and there's a collective grief. And we acknowledge that, we articulate it, we bring sound to it. But we also know that there's a collective healing that can take forth and that can birth forth. So I just want to celebrate all of you for sitting and all of that wisdom and all of that muck and yuck, but still seeing the beauty of what can be birthed out. So those are my comments. I'm going to be quiet because Rosita, I get to cry.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or closing comments?
I forgot, Tanya. I'm sorry, Tanya. Charge it to my head and not my heart. Charge it to these eyeglasses. I need new ones and not my heart, okay?
Rosita, do you want to close us out?
Absolutely. So there is nothing more for me to say but to just echo the deepest gratitude and appreciation. We will be sharing this recording widely. I also want to just second and third the deepest gratitude and appreciation to the amazing facilitators, our peers, our wonderful, amazing members who have been in the muck in building their own skills and building their awareness and building their learning so that they can support this amazing network. They're not done yet. They are actually, in addition to this webinar, they have taken thoughtful time and effort to co-create a toolkit that we will be able to share with our membership in the next coming weeks. And like Red mentioned, what is amazing is that USCAN is developing this bench of amazing members who are your resources, your peers, your thought partners. As Archbishop said, there's no one size fits all approach, but just knowing that you have dear friends out there who have experience and expertise that you can leverage and build upon. It's a beautiful thing to see. And now you know who the folks out there with this knowledge and skill set are. So I think with that, I am happy to wish us all a wonderful rest of our afternoon. And again, if folks could just express their deepest appreciation to this amazing group of members who stood up and leaned forward, I would love you all to do that.
Thank you all. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Rosita, for pulling it together, and thank you, Marie, who's not here, and everybody else from USCAN that pulled it together, and Archbishop Dinkins. I appreciate it so much. It's been so useful in the work that we're doing, and going forward, we are going to be using it more, and surely finding creative ways to use it with even with bureaucracies that don't know that dealing with people is kind of an important skill set. It's been super helpful, and I really, really appreciate being brought in for the training. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to speaking with everybody more. But for now, I hope everyone has a good day. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.